Welcome to Loving Black People, a conversation series. We're so glad that you all could join us tonight. My name is Tim Hurd. I am from Detroit, and I'm currently pursuing my Master's of Higher Education at the University of Pennsylvania. Tonight is part one. It's just part one of a three-part series aimed to generate conversation around Black people's beauty, Black brilliance, and also Black value within the world. The featured guests and performers invite you to contemplate how far we've come while also admiring Black tenacity and Black dignity. We're looking beyond Black suffering to imagine a Black future unencumbered by anti-Black racism, white supremacy, and settler colonialism. There will be a performance by RAII Whitney, a dynamic husband and wife duo from Chicago that have worked with some of music industry's biggest artists, including Common, Alicia Keys, and Ed Sheeran. Their performance will be followed by a provocative conversation about loving Black people in today's society amongst three accomplished scholars, Dr. Chezare Warren of Identity Educational Solutions, LLC, Dr. Sonya Douglass Horsford of the Black Education Research Collective, and Dr. Ashley Woodson of the Abolitionist Teaching Network. You are in for a treat. The broadcast ends with a call to action. Loving Black people is about raising our consciousness to the ways that we have been taught to hate Blackness, to disdain its very existence. Tonight is about pushing back against that narrative and doing better. Enjoy the journey.
My name is Dr. Chezare Warren. I am an associate professor of urban education and teacher education at Michigan State University, founder and CEO of Identity Educational Solutions, LLC, and I am the author of Centering Possibility in Black Education. I was inspired to write this book in 2019 as I spent some time in Harlem, in New York City, in residence as part of an academic fellowship there. And I read a book called Freedom Dreams. And the book is written by Robin D.G. Kelley. And in that book, he chronicles what was in the minds of activists, intellectuals, entertainers who would identify themselves as part of the Black radical tradition. Centering Possibility in Black Education is a book that is for young people, for elders, for caregivers, for advocates, and for educators alike, all people who are interested in improving the education condition of Black children. It is a book that is written in the tradition of Black education as a field that has been committed to both documenting all of the ways that schooling in the U.S. has been an exercise in the dehumanization of Black children and Black people, but also how we have struggled against that dehumanization, how we have fought and persisted to realize versions and forms of schooling that are indeed enriching and inviting for Black children and Black educators. And so this book picks up there, which sort of brings me to my second point, which is that possibility determines the stretch of our doing and being in the world as Black people, not our problems. And as we think about the significance of anti-Blackness as incredibly compelling for helping us to understand the ways that schools are sites of pain and suffering for Black people, it is more compelling to consider what we could do when we lead with possibility rather than leading with our problems. And so I see that as incredibly important. And I think also that Blackness is full of possibility, that we recast and re-understand Blackness as not a thing to be escaped or disdained, but that it is a thing full of wonder and opportunity, and joy and healing. And so this book and this work is an invitation to turn into Blackness for joy and to reimagine nighttime as not something to be escaped while we wait for a morning to come for joy, but to really turn into the nighttime as its own project of joy. I wrote this book both during the pandemic, but also through a racial uprising as we came to understand the loss of George Floyd and his last words, "I can't breathe," and Breonna Taylor and all the folks who have lost their lives at the hands of police. We know what not being able to breathe is about. In this book, I wrote it with every image and every poem every drawing, and every story to be a breath of fresh air. Inhale, exhale as you read this book. I think it is a book that is going to encourage and motivate us to freedom dream. It's the substance of my freedom dream, and the teacher in me, my greatest desire is that whoever picks it up, that it will also inspire their freedom dreams.
What's going on, beautiful people? We are RAII
and Whitney.
And we're so honored to be a part of this event tonight.
It really is a blessing to be able to contribute to volume 1 of this series.
That's right.
Convened by our brother Chezare.
Much love, man.
Yeah.
You'd give to me soon as you are free. Will it ever be? Where is the love? You told me that you didn't love him, and you were gonna say goodbye. But if you really didn't mean it, why did you have to lie? Where is love? You said was mine, oh mine, till the end of time.
Was it just a lie? Where is the love?
If you had a sudden change of heart, I wish that you would tell me so. Don't leave me hanging on these promises. You gotta let me know. It must have been my fate to fall in love with someone else's love. All I can do is wait. That's all I can do. Hey, we need more love. We need more love. We need more love. We need more love. People killing, people dying, children hurting, you hear them crying. If you practice what you preach, then you turn the other cheek. Father, 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 help us, send some guidance from above. People got me questioning, where is the love? 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 Where is the love? Where is the love? Love, 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 yeah. Father, 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 help us.
Father, 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 help us.
Father, 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 help
Father,
us.
won't you please help us?
Father, 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 help us.
We need your guidance,
We
Lord.
need it.
Good evening. My name is Chezare Warren. I'm an author, a scholar, singer-songwriter, and speaker. And tonight, I'm super excited to invite you to Volume 1 of Loving Black People, a conversation series. I'm joined by two dynamic Black women to share in a discussion intended to generate productive dialogue about how we make loving Black people a priority. And tonight, we're musing about Black people's possibility and freedom dreaming out loud, with the goal of both acknowledging the pain and suffering that is Black people's tenuous relationship with the US, but also our worthiness to be treated like human beings full of dignity and virtue. Dr. Sonya Douglass Horsford is a scholar of race, politics of education, and inequality in education. She has published more than 20 articles, edited 3 books on educational equity and leadership, and authored 2 award-winning books, including Learning in a Burning House, Educational Inequality, Ideology, and Disintegration, and also The Politics of Education Policy in an Era of Inequality Toward Democratic Possibilities for Schooling, with Janelle Scott and Gary Anderson. In 2017, Dr. Horsford founded the Black Education Research Collective to convene scholars devoted to conducting, translating, and disseminating research that leads to improved educational opportunities, experiences, and outcomes for Black children and youth. She's my friend, a mother scholar, someone who loves Black people deeply, and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And I'm just so happy to have First Fam in the house tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Chezare.
Also, we have Dr. Ashley Woodson, who is a sociologist of education and an advocate for reparative learning opportunities in Black communities. She uses qualitative methods and critical theories of race to explore Black kids' performances of citizenship and activism. Dr. Woodson is particularly interested in the civic stories adolescents tell as they think through the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and religion. As a mother, an other mother, writer, and activist, she is committed to centering Black students' freedom dreams in this world. She is the director of the Abolitionist Teaching Network's Virtual Freedom School. And Dr. Woodson is also my friend, whom I love dearly, someone who loves Black people deeply, and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So we got the Divine Nine represented, and you know your boys are Alpha. So I'm happy to have both of you here. Thank you for being here tonight. And we're gonna jump right in. What does loving Black people mean to you? Sonya, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chezare. I would say that loving Black people to me means being in community. So really just being connected to one another, to really listening and hearing and being with each other in ways that are empathetic and patient, ensuring that we're starting with our best assumptions about one another and not our worst, and always recognizing that it's about understanding one another, looking out for one another in places where it might be easy to forget that no matter our title or position, that we still have to face difficulties and challenges. So that is why I love Black people. I love love and finding ways that we can connect and support one another, especially during very difficult and polarizing times.
Yeah,
Right.
Ashley.
I think so. In this particular moment where, we have prefixes like trans being misapplied, and we've seen so many intrusions, right? And so many imposters coming into Black communities and wearing the artifacts of Blackness, right? But not the struggles that come along with community membership. I think it's important to say like who we mean when we're referring to Black people. And for me, that's, those of us who, our global position is situated within these legacies of the transatlantic slave trade and imperialism and apartheid and segregation. And we are survivors of that. And we have connections of struggle, but also of joy and of love, through that. So then love is a feeling. It's that togetherness that Sonya spoke of. It's that fellowship. It's that community. But it's also a principle, right? Through which we organize our relationships to one another. It's the choices that we make even when we're not in one another's presence. It's my political decision making. It's my economic decision making. It's my erratic and intimate decision making that Black people are always uplifted and centered, that my sacrifices benefit them the most, that even sometimes against my individual self-interest, I am interested in advancing the condition of Black folks in the Black community. So loving Black folks is uplifting Black folks. It's keeping Black folks primary in how we conduct our daily lives.
Yeah, this is brilliant. And I love the reference that both of you make to loving Black people as a community engagement, a community activity, but it's also a political stance. And it's really interesting to me that saying Black in public can sometimes feel taboo, just saying Black, right? And I think part of loving Black people is acknowledging our Blackness openly and proudly and publicly, in ways that continue to lift us up, as you both point out. But there are a lot of folks who are watching who may or may not be Black, right? What should all of us be doing to better love Black people? What resources, practices, or general recommendations might you make to anybody who's watching the broadcast tonight? And Ashley, we'll start with you.
All right, so I'm going to start with who may or may not be Black. So if you're not Black, then I would probably say, reparations, right? You have to actively engage in practices that counteract the devastation of the historical and structural processes that, made Black, right? That made us who we are and brought us involuntarily, in many instances, to the places where we are, right? You have to be against that. And you have to be a constant ally and co-conspirator in undoing that. And then internally, I think, honestly, it starts with self-love. It starts with looking in the mirror and celebrating that aesthetic, adorning yourself in ways that are authentic to you, right? Not to set a particular rubric of what Black has to look like, but to not shy away from the parts of yourself and the parts of your history, the parts of your family that have been stigmatized or that those have tried to erase or make you feel ashamed of. I think there's a closeness, right? To want to be around Black people, to make intentional decisions, to connect with, right? And to associate with Black people and the communities that some of us are in. Like, that makes it hard, right? But it's not just the coworker across the hall in the institution where we're relatively comfortable, right? It's finding Black people who aren't just in service roles, finding Black people who don't agree with you. For those of us who aren't Black, are all of the Black folks in your life in a subordinate status to you? Like, they're your students or they're your employees, or you have no accountability to them beyond that title that you hold. How do we expand our imagination about what the Black community can be, and how are all of us constantly putting ourselves in situations to develop new relationships across the boundaries of Blackness and the intersectional lines that are within our community? How are we continuing to love and then to test that love and then to love more the next day? That's what it would really mean for me.
Yeah. Sonya, you got anything to add to that?
That was really beautiful. My message would be to listen, to be still, to be quiet, to stop trying to tell people what they should do or how they should feel. Avoid the urge to tell Black people stories without not really understanding, again, why people are doing what they do or have experienced life in the way that they have. I think that to Dr. Woodson's point, we also have to be honest with ourselves. And so quit lying to yourself and to others around commitments to equity and justice if that's really not the case. And so I think honest dialogue is really necessary in this moment, particularly for those who don't identify as Black but are interested in working as allies and advocates. But before doing that, it's important to really listen and understand how you can be of most service.
Yeah, this is great. And something that stands out to me as you both were speaking, Black, we're not crazy. What we've experienced in the world and continue to experience makes us feel crazy, especially when we feel like we always have to stand up and defend ourselves and defend our humanity in ways that most people just don't have to. But it's important for us to also hear that we're not crazy, right? That what we're experiencing is legitimate. And it is a part of our human experience, but it's not the whole of our human experience. And that said, the truth is, Black people are suffering in lots of ways, and many of us are in pain. We live in an anti-Black racist society. In other words, there are particular forms of assault that we experience that render us vulnerable in ways that are familiar to us, but not so familiar to other folks. And that's not likely to change. So that said, once we sort of acknowledge this truth, what should we do with it? Ashley, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I think just to build on the point that Sonya made last, like if your support of Black people can't be done without like immediate gratification or observation, right? I think about those. Remember, you could send the penny and then the orphan will write you a letter. If you can't love us and trust us with the material support that you would provide without also watching us, like that's not love. And I think that that's really important. So thank you, Sonya, for raising that important point of sometimes you don't have to be there to demonstrate your love to Black folk. We feel it from a distance. If you sending it, we feel it. But to your question, Chaz, like pain is part of the human condition. So Black people aren't unique in that respect. What's unique about our story is that we spent so long demanding that our pain be acknowledged, right? That it be part of the public dialogue. And now it is, right? We are seconds away. We are a log on away from watching one of us being killed in a particularly brutal manner. So Black pain is now part of the conversation in ways that it hasn't been before, but toward what ends, right? Towards like a politics of outrage that often don't even align with what we would want. It sells newspapers, it sells magazines. Folks who know nothing about our struggle get consulting gigs, right? And get to represent our story and our struggle for financial gain, while the families of those who have been brutalized have nothing coming from the state, right? From the authorities who have abused them. So I would
racial equity calls and grants and opportunities. This is the moment.
And I've been doing this work for some time, and I ain't never seen your name before, right? So I'm getting asked to review grants and to review articles. I never read none of these works in the citations. Like, who are you even building your understanding of Blackness on? But that's a whole nother, because we're gonna focus on love today.
We go.
We're gonna focus on love today. So I think in loving ourselves through this pain, it's about organizing around harm reduction and figuring out ways to insist on rest, figuring out ways to structure joy, to give us time to breathe and to heal, to disconnect when necessary, and to not judge and shame one another because all of our activisms don't look the same, right? I think that that's most important. That grace and good faith that Sonya had mentioned earlier is really important for this particular historical moment, so that we can honor the various survivals and coping strategies that support the diverse types of action that we're going to need to potentially turn a sort of page. I do believe that the pain is permanent. I do believe that that's always going to be a feature of our subordination. But I hope that we're able to turn pages in which love and hope and rest and joy do become resources that we can more readily access.
Yeah. And we are people who tell great stories, but we know that there's also a story that gets told about us. And those stories that get told about us that tend not to be told by us are stories that leave out the ways that we have always found joy and hope and love and healing within our communities, even as we suffer through the terror of Jim Crow and Reconstruction and Black Code and chattel slavery. And it's really, I think, astounding that on the one hand that we try to dichotomize the conversation and say, well, we just forever in pain and suffering, and we completely forget that that's not the whole of us, though it is an important part of our story. So, and Sonya, the three of us are educators who do the work of reading and thinking and writing quite a bit about race and Blackness and inequality in education. And I'm just wondering, from your point, you're a national leader and voice in this conversation. What should parents, leaders, and others who are interested in improving the conditions of Black kids learning inside or outside of a formal school setting be doing? Right? What actions can they take? What should folks take away?
I mean, one thing that I'm hoping we'll do, because I think it's important to change the research evidence and base that we really guide all of education upon. And so one of the things that I'm doing, and it may not be as practical, but I think it's necessary in that we change, again, the research knowledge, the methodologies that we're using, the perspectives that we bring, the questions that we ask. And by doing that, we can then collect information that we know really represents what's happening in schools from a Black perspective. And with that information, we can better leverage resources. I think we need to advocate for educational reparations, and it needs to be based on research that centers our experiences. So it's a long game, in my view, in terms of really, again, changing the research base to shape policy, to shape practice, to go after the funding and resources that may be presented one way, but in some ways could serve as reparations when in the hands of individuals that know how to implement those funds and how to make sure that they're being used appropriately. So I'm really focused on how we mobilize around resources and representation. I think there's so much research literature on the importance of equitable practices, culturally relevant and responsive approaches. The one challenge I find and what Burke seeks to do is really focus on that policy and funding conversation. So how do we make sure that we get resources into communities and into schools and into the hands of educators and families so that we can do the type of work that we know needs to happen? It's not that we don't know what to do. Oftentimes it's that we may not have the resources and the capacity to do it. And so that's what we want to be able to do through our organization and through partnerships with educators and families.
I really like that you brought up partnerships, because we're academics, and sometimes academics can be over in the ivory tower, not connected to communities, and sometimes communities are doing their work and they're grinding. And I think that there's some responsibility because of the power and privilege we do have in higher ed to do more of the outreach. But both of you, so I think that's an important part to dig in terms of how do we build solidarity with communities and in spaces and places where we're not readily represented. But also both of you in one way or another have spoken to reparations. I want to just real quick, for folks who are not real clear what that conversation should be or really have an understanding of reparations, what do we say? What is reparations exactly in the ways that you all have used it?
It's compensation and accountability for practices of violence, exploitation, marginalization, the ways in which Black folks have been excluded from economic centers, cultural centers, right? Not centers in terms of physical locations, but the means of production, the cultural regimes that determine who gets to feel, who gets to be, who gets to get recognized, who gets to sit on a jury, right? What a good teacher looks like, what a scientist looks like, what art is. So it is both financial and ideological. It is cultural, it is spiritual, it is a form of reckoning that starts with our socioeconomic exploitation and exclusion, but expands into other modes of being and preserving and sustaining and insisting on dignity and human flourishing in Black communities, that standard would be set and that all resources would be put towards ensuring that standard, since for so long resources were intentionally directed toward making sure we didn't have it.
Yeah. Sonya, anything you want to add to that?
I don't think there's much to add. I would say that we need to we really need to change the curriculum. We really need to make sure that we have, that we rethink teacher and leader preparation. We need to rethink, again, community education. How do we provide resources not only for students who are in classrooms, but for community centers and families to help us, again, understand and equip ourselves with the knowledge that we need about our own history, but also how to navigate this challenging country and world that we find ourselves in. So I think it's all of that, and it requires an acknowledgement again of the fact that we have and continue to experience historical and collective trauma as a people. And so what do we do with that as it relates to, again, centering possibility and ensuring that we have what we need to really access our freedom dreams?
Yeah. And I'll just add that I think people hear the word reparations and they automatically think tear down everything. Now, that might be some people's definition, but really reparations is about institution building. It is not transactional in the sense, give us a windfall and then, placate Black people. That's not loving Black people. It is about building institutions that serve us and reckoning with the facts and the history that the institutions we presently have do not serve us, right? And so reparations is just that. It is about building and creating generational opportunity and generational access in ways that, that are proportionate to the ways we suffer. So this has been an extraordinary conversation, and we're already getting to the end, which is sad. But I'm excited to keep the conversation going tonight on Facebook following tonight's conversation. So here's my final question, and whichever one of you wants to tackle this first, you can. But Sonya said and ended her remarks with freedom dreams, and the book that I just wrote is very much inspired by Robin D.G. Kelley's Freedom Dreams. In part, he makes this argument about how intellectuals, artists, orators, and activists in the Black radical tradition centered themselves in their justice campaigns that we sort of know them for today, with the thought of who or what they were fighting for, above and beyond who or what they were fighting against. And I found that to be incredibly important as I started to spend time last year in 2019 in New York, thinking about what was in the mind of a Malcolm X or a Stokely Carmichael or Ella Baker. When they thought about Black people, did they just think about our pain and suffering, or did they also think about the possibility, who we could become, right? What we're fighting for. And so I imagine then their freedom dreams were anchored to notions of Black dignity and self-determination and hope and joy. So when you think about today's world and all that's happened in just the last 365 days, what are your freedom dreams?
My freedom dream would be that I am not my ancestors' wildest dreams, right? I hope that they dreamed for more. So as I think about my complicity, like capitalist consumption, and the ways that I still romanticize like aspects of integration, the ways that I've hurt other Black people, I would hope that I'm extended grace by my ancestors. I hope they're looking down and the good outweighs the bad, but I hope that they dreamed for something more than me. And my descendants, literal and figurative, I hope that they then are able to manifest my wildest dreams, right? So I consider myself an extension of that. But my freedom dream would be that I'm not their wildest dream. So I had the t-shirt, like I got the t-shirt, and then I stopped wearing the t-shirt because I do hope that their vision for our liberation and our wholeness was more than what I've been able to manifest in my life.
For me, it's an emancipatory vision of education, which I'm really focused on and excited about in terms of action. Again, recognizing the limitations of the society that we're in, but trying to find ways to actively secure what I believe belongs to Black people. And so that emancipatory vision, again, is really laying claim to the things that we find are important about education, valuing it as a human right, valuing the profession as not just a job, but a calling and a ministry. Really making sure that we embrace education as a collective good and responsibility. It's not about individualism and competition. And that education is the practice of freedom. That, again, it's not about test scores or trying to increase or close achievement gaps, but rather focusing on how we can liberate ourselves and really ensure that, as one of my colleagues said, that freedom becomes an accessible idea for people. I would argue that it isn't necessarily that. And so how do we make sure that it becomes accessible and that we can pursue our dreams?
Yeah. When I think about my freedom dream, I wanna pick up where you just left off, Sonya, and say freedom is not a destination. It is an aspiration. It is something we strive for and work for every single day of our lives. And it's not so that we can become some version of ourselves that was manufactured and given to us, but that we find purpose in our person. I think it's really important that part of my freedom dream is just that we stop telling Black kids that you got to work twice as hard to be half as good, that we stop creating paranoias, which are all well-meaning, but do not acknowledge and give attention to our innate worthiness and our innate value in the world. And I think another freedom dream, just to further add to what you both have said, is that Black folks, whoever you are and whatever body you're in, that you feel emboldened to be who you are in any space that you're in, right? And I think about this a lot as a professor, and I meet Black students who walk around the college campus as if they owe the university something, and the university is the one that is blessed to have them. And that's a different conversation that we got to continue to have with young people, that our institutions are better because you're in them and not the other way around. Let me thank you both, Dr. Horsford and Dr. Woodson. This was brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your time. And before we wrap up, Dr. Horsford, tell us a little bit about the Black Education Research Collective and how folks can support Burke's work.
Thank you, Chezare. The Black Education Research Collective is a research center at Teachers College, and we convene faculty and students who are doing work that's related to the educational experiences of Black people. And you can visit us at our website, which is on the Teachers College website at Black Education Research Collective. Stay connected, reach out if you're doing work that's related. We would love you to be a part of our community of scholars.
Yes. And how can they follow Burke?
Thank you. Our handle is at Burke, BERC_TC.
Perfect. And Dr. Woodson, tell us a little bit about the Abolitionist Teaching Network and how folks can support ATN's work.
All right. So the Abolitionist Teaching Network was founded in 2020 by Dr. Bettina Love as an extension of her grassroots organizing and body of research.
Shout out to Dr. Love.
Shout out to Dr. Love and her activism. Our mission, succinctly stated, is eliminating barriers to Black kids' freedom dreams in partnership with the teachers in their classrooms, in partnerships with the caregivers in their homes, in partnerships with community leaders. We want them to feel safe to learn and experience healthy relationships and see positive representations of themselves. The best way to support is to donate through our website, abolitionistteachingnetwork.org, where you can find all of the tags and Instagrams and Twitters and Facebooks, ats and hashtags and whatnot. But also, if financial support is not something you can do at this time, please share the resources widely through the platforms that you do have access to.
Loving Black people is a revolutionary act. All of us have a role to play in spreading that love. Again, I want to appreciate Drs. Horsford and Woodson for taking their time this evening to be in conversation. And this is just a beginning. I'm excited to keep the conversation going with all of you who are viewing tonight. After the next segment, head over to Facebook, to my Facebook page, and let's talk. Let's have some Q&A. And I'm also going to announce who won the autographed copies of Centering Possibility in Black Education. Thank you all so much for joining, and I'll see you again soon.
Thank you again for joining us in tonight's conversation, Loving Black People, a conversation series, Volume 1. This is just Volume 1. We got more in store. Join Dr. Warren for his live Q&A on Facebook, and also to see if you have won the raffle for a signed copy of his latest book, Centering Possibility in Black Education. We hope to see you there. Also, donations to the Abolitionist Teaching Network and the Black Education Research Collective can be made by heading over to www.lovingblackpeople.com. There you will also find info on how to purchase new copies of Dr. Warren's book, Centering Possibility in Black Education. Look out for Volume 2 of this conversation, because we'll be back in the summer of 2021. I'm your host, Tim Hurd. Thank you again for joining us tonight. God bless and good night.